What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we are going to continue our coverage over the X-Men, but now it's time for us to jump into some Cable comics. Now, this takes place right after the Executioner song because, as we all know, at the end of that crossover, we saw Cable and also Strife fall into a time vortex, and we're kind of left to wonder what exactly happened to them after they had fell into that time vortex. And so we're going to cover the first 4 issues of Cable's ongoing series. Oh, yeah, that's right. This was Cable's first ongoing series. You see, we had covered Cable's Blood and Metal, and that was Cable's first series, but that was a mini series. This one is going to be an ongoing series. So for the next few, I don't know, playlists for different X-Men crossovers, we're going to cover a lot of X-Men comics involving Cable comics because Cable had a series that went on for a good while alongside the other X titles like X Factor, X-Men, Excalibur, and so on and so on. Like I said, though, this kind of gives us the idea of Cable coming back, but also kind of making us wonder what happened to Cable after he fell into that time vortex. Now, the first story arc that we are covering today is beginning the process of us learning about the actual origin of Cable. And let me explain. You see, in the early 1990s for Marvel Comics, Cable became really popular to the fans. And I say he was probably just as popular or more popular than Wolverine because to Marvel, they were kind of like, hey, this guy is blowing up. We have to go ahead and give him his own book. But the problem was, though, we did not know the actual origin of Cable. And so over time in the 1990s, you had Marvel begin to give Cable the Wolverine treatment, where over time we'll learn different pieces about the actual origin of Cable. The problem is that for Cable is that most of his origin take place in other books besides his ongoing series. So right now, we're only getting a small sample of his actual origin, but then other books kind of fill in the blanks that we need to know the actual idea of the origin of Cable. But either way, in his first 4-part story arc, we are beginning to learn that Cable was part of a different crew. You see, we learned that Cable was working alongside a crew called the Clan Chosen. Now, the Clan Chosen is actually built on the idea of a different group called the Ascani. Now, we have not officially talked about that group either, and the Ascani first appeared back in, I want to say, X Factor issue number 66 or 67. But in that book right there, we saw one of the members of the Ascani take baby Nathan into the far future to save his life. And that was the only time we ever saw them. But we get the idea that they were a group of people from the far future who are fighting Apocalypse in their far future. But by this point, they're no longer around. And so instead, you have the Clan Chosen. Now, the Clan Chosen are not fighting against Apocalypse. They're fighting against the New Canaanites. And I really hope I pronounced that word correctly. I tried my best to make sure I pronounced that word correctly. Now, when it comes to the New Canaanites, they took over where Apocalypse left off at. But either way, we do see the Clan Chosen alongside with Cable trying their best to fight against the New Canaanites. The problem is that by the end of their battle, we learned that Cable had a wife and a son. Now, apparently, his wife got severely injured, so she ended up dying right in the arms of Cable. But the problem was, though, for Cable is that now he told his wife that he'll take care of their son, Tyler. But then he's informed that his son has been kidnapped by Strife. And so we're kind of left to believe that Strife is working with this new group called the New Canaanites, who again taking over the world where Apocalypse left off at. But now we know that apparently in the far future, Cable was married and he had a son, and his name was Tyler. And the question is now, what happened to Tyler? But then we learn that the entire scene we just saw was actually a hologram being played by Garrison Kane. Now, Garrison Kane is better known as Weapon X. Now, as we all know, in the 1990s, we kind of learned that Wolverine was Weapon X. That was his code name when he went through the actual Weapon X program. but then they gave that name over to, well, Garrison Kane. Now, for Garrison Kane, he was part of Department K, and they turned him into a cyborg after he went through some, so severe injuries. Now, back in Cable's Blood and Metal, he also got again severely injured, and you had Cable take Garrison into the far future, the 39th century, where you have Cable being able to give Garrison Kane a new cyborg body to use. And so he got an upgrade thanks to Cable. But the problem was that Cable went back in time when it came to the Executioner song. Garrison stayed behind the far future. And so with them being left in the future, he's able to go to a library in the future where you are able to pull out different discs to watch different holograms of different moments in time. And so for Garrison, he was able to learn that Cable had a wife and a son named Tyler that was kidnapped by Strife. Now, while you have Garrison Kane going back to his home or his base here in the far future, he is attacked by a group of thugs. Now, for Garrison Kane, these thugs do not stand a chance at all. He was able to take them down very easily and go on with his day. But now we have to jump over to General Haight. Now, General Haight is actually the leader of the New Canadites in the far future in the 39th century. And we actually see him with other members of the actual organization meeting up and talking about Garrison Kane. Now, their problem is that they don't have any information about Garrison Kane at all. They have no idea where he came from. And so for Haight, he's kind of like, listen, let's go ahead and send in the flatliners. Now, it seems to me the flatliners are kind of like the police force used in the far future to make sure the people of the city stay in line. And so you have Haight tell the flatliners, you better make sure that you kill off Garrison Kane, because if you don't, I'll call somebody else in, and that person will most likely kill you. But getting back over to Garrison Kane, we do learn that Garrison Kane has been living with the clan chosen in the far future, the same crew that had worked with Cable in that flashback we saw earlier. Now, when it comes to Garrison Kane, he wants to know more about Tyler Dayspring, the actual son of Cable, and that is when we get another flashback. And so in this flashback, we do learn that Cable and his crew were able to find a hideout that was being used by Strife, except once they were able to get into the actual hideout, they find Tyler Dayspring, who is now actually working alongside with Strife. Now, we do learn that apparently for Tyler, he was being controlled by another character who kind of made him go a tad bit crazy, but also wanting to work for Strife. But we do see Tyler being able to get a hold of Dawn Silk, and we do see him being able to mind link with her. Now, this whole mind link situation is actually really important. The reason why, because you have Cable being able to knock out his son Tyler to save Dawn Silk, but because she was technically mind linked to Tyler, it kind of ruined her speech in a way. And so she is unable to actually talk proper. But you didn't have Cable realize they have to get the heck out of there. And so you have Cable and his crew get the heck out of there, but you have Cable and Strife, both in this flashback, vow to kill one another for different reasons. Now for Cable, we already know why, because what Strife did to his son Tyler. But for Strife, it's more of like, no, I just want to kill off Cable because this man is always in my way. But once we get back over to the present day, we actually see Garrison Kane kind of understanding what happened to Cable, what also happened to Tyler as well. But right after that, you did have our heroes be attacked by, well, the Flatliners. Now, when the Flatliners appear, their main goal is to, well, kill everyone in the room. And so, like in the flashback, in the present day, we see Dawn Silk once again become an actual hostage. Now, luckily for her, Cable arrives. Now, this is a huge moment because, like I said at the very beginning of this video, at the tail end of the Executioner song, we saw Cable and Strife both fall into the time vortex, kind of left to wonder what exactly happened to them. But now we see that Cable's okay and he's back with a new hairstyle. Either way, you do have Cable being able to work with the rest of the heroes to get rid of the flatliners. Now, they do lose their base, and the reason why, because when you kill off a flatliner, it sets off a bomb that was implanted inside of them. And so they had to leave their base as it got blown up in the sky. Now we jump over to Africa in its far future, where we pick up with General Hate once again, and we actually see him meeting up with a character known as Sincere. Now apparently Sincere had just killed off a group of rebels who were trying to fight against, well, the new Canaanites. Either way, for Sincere, he's now be given a new job by General Hate to go after Cable and also Garrison Kane. Now, we do learn that for Sincere, he is going to accept the job, but at the same time, he still wants to kill off the new Canaanites. And so it kind of seems like he's being forced to actually work for this organization. But when the time comes, sooner or later, he might try to actually kill them. Now, getting back over to our heroes, their main goal is to make sure that the new Canaanites cannot be able to use their new time machine. Now, for our heroes, they believe that the new time machine must be located near Niagara Falls, except once they're able to scan the actual area, they realize the new time machine is inside Niagara Falls, inside a base. Now, for our heroes, they are very concerned about the idea that the new Canaanites might try to send somebody back in time to kind of make sure everything falls in plan for them in the far future, to make sure nothing changes in the past that can ruin the control over in the far future. But for our heroes, they got to make sure to get rid of this new time machine that they had built. And so as we get into the second chapter, we actually do pick up with the clan Chosen and also Cable attacking the base in Niagara Falls. Now, when they do arrive, well, actually, they were able to sneak into the base, but once they were able to sneak into the actual base and fight their way through some guards, they think that this is going to be an easy job, except when they get into the main part of the base, they are then confronted by more members of the Flatliners. So they have another battle ahead of them against these guys right here. But now we have to jump over to General Hate and the other members of the New Canaanites. Now, when we do, we see Hate basically is tell us that they're going to send Sincere back in time. And the reason why, because he knows that Cable will at least try to go back in time. Now, the only reason why he knows that is because of, well, Garrison Kane. Garrison Kane is not from the future. Sooner or later, you have to send him back home. And so sooner or later, Cable will go back with Garrison back in time. But on top of that, Sincere is going to be there to make sure that Cable cannot prevent anything from happening that will lead up to Apocalypse becoming the actual ruler in the far future in the world. Now, also, Sincere was sent back in time to kill somebody else who had also went back in time as well, better known as the Other. Now, we have no idea who the Other is, but apparently it's somebody very close to Cable. But getting back over to Cable and the others, we do see them continuing to fight against the Flatliners. Now, this battle is more intense because, well, the Flatliners had the advantage over our heroes. And the reason why I'm saying that because, well, the Flatliners brought a whole army with them to fight against our heroes. Now, luckily for Cable, there is a character known as Boak who can use his powers to kind of shut down all their weapons, but to take out all the Flatliners. The only problem is, though, Boak is a robot, and so once he does this move, he'll fall apart completely and would need to be reassembled to come back online. Now, here's a big problem, though, because once he does that and he's able to take out the Flatliners, we have Hope, another member of the Clan Chosen, get very upset with Cable. And the reason why, because she looked at Boak as an actual person, not a robot. But also, she hates the idea that Cable will just use anybody for anything when it comes to him trying to complete a mission. And so she does express how mad she is at him, but either way, they have to continue on. Where you have Hope tell Cable that it seems like the new Canaanites were able to send someone back in time. Now, we already know who that was. That was Sincere. But now for Cable, he thinks it's time for him to go back as well to make sure the past is protected by enemies of the future. And so then we jump back in time where we do pick up with Sincere, and we do learn that who he is looking for. He is actually looking for, well, Mr. Tolliver. Now remember, we're still learning everything about Tolliver, but apparently Tolliver is also from the future as well. But on top of that, the last time we saw Tolliver was when Cable and him fought back in X-Force Comics. I want to say X-Force issue number 15. But either way, we were left to believe that Tolliver had died. But apparently, the Sincere Tolliver is still alive somewhere in the past. And the question is now, where is he hiding out at? Now, the rest of the second chapter is really being affected by what happened over in X-Force Comics. Now, we have not covered X-Force since we had wrapped up our coverage over the Executioner song, but just know that there is a story arc involving both Cannonball and Sunspot when it comes to the Gray Malkin. Now, the Gray Malkin is actually a space station that Cable had left behind in the past. Now, the Gray Malkin was built in the future, and the Gray Malkin is kind of like a base for Cable to use, but also it has all these different weapons that Cable can use out in the field as well. Like I said, though, he left it in the past. And so when you have Hope trying her best to get a hold of the Gray Malkin, she can't. And for Cable, it's kind of like what happened to the Gray Malkin. Now, over in X-Force Comics, we were kind of left to be told that it had blown up. And so for Cable and Garrison Kane, they're kind of like, we need to go back in time to figure out what happened to the Gray Malkin, but also to figure out who in the world is in the past right now, possibly trying to change the timeline. Like, for example, Sincere. And so you have Hope being able to teleport both Cable and Garrison Kane back in time. The problem is, though, when they do arrive at the Gray Malkin, for some reason, is at the bottom of the ocean. And the question is right now, why? Now, technically, we are told that it was blown up back in X-Force Comics, but for Cable and also for Garrison Kane, they don't know that yet. All they know is that for some reason, the Gray Malkin, the space station, or part of the space station, had fallen to the bottom of the ocean. And so as we dive into the third chapter, we actually pick up with Cable and also Garrison Kane stuck in the Gray Malkin, but the Gray Malkin is at the bottom of the ocean. And with the power being out, that means Cable is no longer able to actually teleport across the world. He needs the Gray Malkin to be active so he can actually teleport across the world. And so for our two heroes, they kind of believe that this is going to be their end. And so you have Cable pull out some beer that apparently he had hidden behind some kind of panel, and you have the two characters drink together to spend their last moments with one another. Now, for Garrison, it's kind of like, listen, if I'm going to die, I need to know about your past. And so you have Garrison ask Cable one more time about the actual origin behind Cable's life. But now we have to jump over to G.W. Bridges. Now, G.W. Bridges used to work for S.H.I.E.L.D. when it came to our earlier part of our coverage over X-Force. Now, for G.W. Bridges, he also worked alongside with Cable. You see, over the years, Cable had formed a lot of teams. You had X-Force, you had the Clan Chosen, but you also had the Six Pack. Now, the Six Pack took place in the past before X-Force was actually formed. Matter of fact, when Cable first arrived in the past, he formed that team there. Now, Garrison Kane and G.W. Bridges, they were also part of that team as well. But for G.W., after leaving Six Pack, he joined S.H.I.E.L.D. and then he was assigned to bring down Cable because, well, Cable and X-Force, they broke some laws. Now, for GW, he got word that Cable is dead. But for GW, he still wants to know more secrets about Cable's past, his actual origin. And so we see GW breaking into one of Cable's old bases or one of his old safe houses. Now, for GW, he has to go through some security that Cable had left behind. But once he was able to get through those things, he was then able to access a computer. Now, this book is also beginning to build up the world of Deadpool as well. And the reason why, because we actually pick up with the first appearance of Weasel. Now, for Weasel, he's just minding his business, but Weasel does have connections to Deadpool to the point where he is actually confronted by Sincere. And you have Sincere asking Weasel, hey, where can I find Deadpool? And you have Weasel say, listen, the last I heard is that Deadpool is looking for his ex-girlfriend, Vanessa. And really, we're going to see Vanessa here very soon in this video. But for Weasel, it's kind of like, dude, I have no idea where Cable is at. Sorry, not Cable, where Deadpool is at. But I know one thing. He is currently looking for his ex-girlfriend, Vanessa. Now, getting back over to Garrison Kane and also Cable, you have Cable actually tell us that by this point in our coverage over X-Men comics, he actually believes that he is the clone of Strife. Because remember, for a good while there, he had no idea that him and Strife had the same face. But then later on, he learned that him and Strife did have the same face, but he still believes that he is the clone. And the only reason why, because the way he looks and how powerful Strife truly is. If Strife looks normal and very powerful, that means Cable must be the clone of Strife. But also Strife is the son of Cyclops and Jean Grey. Now we already know that technically that Cable is the actual child of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, not Cyclops and Jean Grey. But because Madeline is the clone of Jean Grey, it kind of makes Jean Grey the mother of Cable. It gets really weird. But either way, is Cable saying that he believes that he is the clone of Strife? Now, his main goal is to still find Strife and to hopefully get rid of him. But getting back over to, well, G.W. Bridges, we actually see him with the professor. Now, when I say the professor, I don't mean like Charles Xavier. I really mean more of an AI system that Cable brought from the future to the past to help him out. Now, over time, we're going to learn more about the professor and really the backstory between the professor and another AI system we had in the earlier parts of our coverage over the X-Men. Now, for the professor, he informs G.W. Bridges that technically the Gray Malkin is not completely destroyed. Now, like I said earlier, the whole idea of the Gray Malkin being destroyed took place over in X-Force Comics. So we don't know what exactly went down just yet. But you have Professor tell us like, no, only parts of the Gray Malkin is at the bottom of the ocean. The rest of it is still orbiting the Earth at the moment. And also, you have Professor tell GW Cable is not dead. Matter of fact, Cable is well alive at this exact moment. Now, for Sincere, he's still in the past trying to hunt down, well, Mr. Tolliver. But the problem is, no one knows truly where Tolliver is at. And really, for some people out there, they kind of believe that Tolliver is dead. In matter of fact, they're trying to get a hold of his will. And so we see Sincere just fighting against the mercenaries who were trying to get their hands on Tolliver's will. But unfortunately, they won't because, well, they're being killed off by Sincere. Now, the ending of this chapter is pretty funny because we jump back over to Garrison and also Cable, and they're still at the bottom of the ocean, the part of the Gray Malkin that's at the bottom of the ocean. But while being inside there, for Garrison, he believes that they are going to die. But then you have Cable tell us that earlier, that panel where he got the beer from, there were some wires in there. He put those wires on his body and, of course, power up the entire place up just like that. And now Cable's allowed to teleport once again across the world. But the first place he teleports to is the same base that G.W. Bridges is at. And let's not forget, there's some bad blood between these two characters. And so as we get into the fourth chapter, we actually pick up with Cable and also GW fighting against each other. Now, the reason why these two characters are fighting against each other is really more about the idea of they have some hatred towards one another for some actual good reasons, but at the same time, it could easily be worked out if the two guys sit down and talk things out. Because for Cable, it's more the idea that GW left Six Pack, didn't join SHIELD, and then after a while begun to hunt down Cable when him and X-Force broke some laws. Now for GW, it's more the idea that while being on a Six Pack, two members of the team got severely injured, Garrison Kane and also, well, Hammer. Now, Garrison Kane, we already talked about. He's basically a cyborg, but that's because of Department K. They were able to fix his body by giving him cybernetic body parts. Now, you do have the two guys being able to start fighting against one another once you have Garrison step in and say, like, hey, listen, we're on the same side here. Let's just talk some things out. But now we have to jump back over to the rest of Six Pack. Now, like I said earlier, like multiple times by this point, that a lot of things happen over in X-Force comics. But again, we're going to cover that story down the road because most of these stories took place at the same time. And really, you would have to jump between each issue of each title to kind of get the full story of everything happening in X-Men comics. And we're not going to do that because then it might get a tad bit confusing and we'll have like many characters all at once. But either way, you had a six pack or these three characters come together to hunt down X-Force, but also hunt down Cable. So Domino, Grizzly, and also Hammer. Now, Hammer is the other person who was also severely injured thanks to Cable, to the point where he is mostly paralyzed. Now, there is another character, and that will be Copycat, aka Vanessa. Now, Vanessa is the ex-girlfriend of Deadpool. You see, in the earlier parts of X-Force, when it came to Cable and the rest of X-Force, they believed that Domino was actually there. But in reality, it wasn't Domino, it was Copycat, Vanessa, pretending to be Domino, while the real Domino was actually a prisoner to Mr. Tolliver. Either way, with all those different things happening, when it comes to these guys, they're trying their best to use the old base, the old equipment of X-Force and Cable to hopefully find Cable and X-Force. Now, getting back over to Garrison, also GW, and, well, Cable, they are discussing about what happened to the Gray Malkin. Now, again, X-Force is the reason why the Gray Malkin had technically exploded. But at this point in our coverage over this story, you have GW saying he believes the Gray Malkin must be completely gone now because him and Professor were talking to one another in the last chapter, but then out of nowhere, the Professor disappeared. Now, for Cable, he does not believe that the Gray Malkin is completely gone. And the only reason why, because he's still kind of able to talk to other computer programs that are connected to the Gray Malkin. And so right now, the only way to figure out what exactly happened to the Gray Malkin is to find X-Force and hopefully use X-Force to figure out the big secret behind what happened to the Gray Malkin. But now we jump over to Sincere. Now, Sincere listening to all different kinds of radio transmission to hopefully find the two targets that he came to pass looking for. Now, we already know one of those targets is actually Tolliver. The other one would be Cable. Now, we are left to believe here that Cable might be the father of Tolliver. Matter of fact, we're left to believe here that Tolliver is Tyler, the long-lost son of Cable, who had apparently came back to the past. Because you have Sincere say, oh, his father is here now too, kind of telling us like, hey, Tolliver is actually the son of Cable. He is Tyler from the future. Now, we jump back over to the six-pack, Grizzly, Domino, and also Copycat. Hammer cannot walk, so he stays out of the vehicle they came inside. Now, while they're trying to smash their way to the old base of X-Force to hopefully find where X-Force is hiding out at now, they run into Cable and his crew. Now, here's the thing. Because once you have Copycat see Cable, she is really excited. And it kind of showed that back then when she was pretending to be Domino, she had actually fell in love with Cable. But for Cable, it's kind of like, you were not Domino though. Like, yes, I'm in love with her. When I found out you were not actually her, that love was no longer around because you're not her. I only care for Domino. And so you have Copycat just disappear once you have Cable kind of break it down for her, like, you were not Domino the entire time where I was expressing my love. Instead, you were pretending to be the woman I actually cared for. Now, once you have our heroes being able to make it back over to the vehicle that Six Pack came in, you have Hammer try to use the vehicle against Cable by bringing him down to get revenge for what Cable did to him in the past, which is, well, paralyzing him. Now, you do have Garrison stop Hammer saying, listen, Cable understands what he did in the past was completely wrong. But at the same time, he also brought tech back that could possibly help you. Now, for Hammer, he does not want anything from Cable at all. And the reason why, because one, he hates Cable, but also because he's afraid, not really afraid, but he does not want to be a machine like Cable is. Because look at Cable. He looks like a cyborg, like he's half machine, half man. And I do not want to be like him. Now, you do have everyone split up, and what I mean is that for Cable and also the Six Pack, they're not really able to reform their old group. And the reason why, because they're kind of wondering, can they actually trust Cable? And you have Cable realize that no, they can't trust him because he understands that he's not really able to open up to them. And so you have Six Pack go their own way to go find Copycat, while you have Cable, well, tries to go find X-Force. And so this was the first story arc for Cable as we work our way up to Fatal Attractions. But either way, it's now time for us to cover the Deadpool miniseries that came out right after this one. With that being said, please leave me a like down below and subscribe. Also, if you have any suggestions on books I should read, well, please let me know in the comments below because you never know, your suggestion could be a future video down the road. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.